Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome to Wix Fixer. This is going to be a series about how to get data from an external API and display it on your Wix website. In this first part, we're going to be talking about API documentation. So let's get started. Okay, welcome. And first of all, I want to just show you the final result of what we are building. And that is this repeater, which is populated by data from an external source, from the Marvel website. And here you can see pictures and names of the characters. And this is all data that's not on my Wix website. This is not a Wix collection. This is an external database that is serving the data through an API. And there are many different kinds of APIs that work in different ways. And this specific example will be using the Marvel API. So the first step to using an external API is to check out their developer site. So for Marvel, they have this site developer.marvel.com. And this is basically where we have access to the API information. And you'll probably be prompted to create some kind of account, whatever API you're using. Here, you can just click Get Started and sign up to the Marvel API. And after you're signed in, you will have access to this developer account. And in this developer account, you'll be provided with information about the API that is relevant specifically to you. Here in the Marvel account, we have a public key and a private key. Disclaimer, you should never ever show your private key to anyone like I'm doing now. I'm only showing you the private key because it's not really important to me if you use up all my calls. So you can see here I have a call limit. I can only make 3,000 a day. And if somebody else was to use my private key, then they would be using up my calls and I wouldn't be able to make any calls. And number two, this is not connected to my credit card or any kind of payment. So no matter how many calls you make, I won't be charged money for it. But a lot of APIs do have some kind of cost once you go over a certain amount of calls or based on whatever plan you select. So you do have to be very careful about who you show your private key to and how you store it. And the next video, I'll be showing you how to correctly store your private key in Wix. So public key, private key, you can kind of think of it as a username and password. And then here is your limit. Each API will have different limits and different ways of kind of forming this, but it's important to know so you know if you'll be exhausting your API or if you'll need to enter a paid plan at some point for your website. This is authorized refers. This is something that you won't see necessarily in every API, but basically I need to add the URLs of websites that will be making calls to the API. And in our case, it's going to be my Wix website. And to get the URL, all I have to do is view my live site. And then I'm just going to take the domain from right over here. And I'm going to copy it over right here. So I need to add a new refer and enter the URL. And they have some specifications here that they don't want the HTTPS and they don't want that. So let's just click update over here. And I'm going to click update again. Entries. Okay, it looks like it should be okay. I'm not sure exactly why there's an error, but when we try out our API, we'll see if it works or not. And this should be okay. So this is what you need to add over here. And if you're going to make calls to your API from several websites, then you might need to add several different authorized refers. And that is basically what you need to know about your developer account, at least in the Marvel API. And the next thing you'll do is probably check out the documentation. So each API will have documentation, which will specify the different calls that you can make to the API. And calls are all in the form of a slug. So you'll have a certain domain or endpoint, and this will be added after the endpoint to make that specific call to the API. And each one here does something else. So this one gets a full list of characters. That's the one we're going to be using in this example. And you can also get one specific character. You can get creators. There's lots of things that you can get here. And again, every API will have different ones. Some will be get, some might be post, which are different actions that you can take with the API. And except for just this part of the documentation, you'll have some other instructions. So if you check out this how-tos here, then you'll have getting started, general information, API results, what kind of data you'll be getting back, authorization. So for our example, what's really important to us is general information and authorization. So if we take a look here at the general information, so we have our service endpoint, okay, which is the URL that's going to go before these slugs over here. And we have some explanation about the requests, etc. But what's really important for us here is the authorization, because the authorization for this API is a little complicated, but that's good because it's better to learn with something more complicated and then encounter simpler versions of it in the future. So here we have an explanation about how to authorize this API. And basically, there's three parts to the authorization. So first of all, there's something called a timestamp, which is basically a string that you can decide. For here, in this example, they just use the number 1, and that's what we'll use as well in our case. And the second one is the API key. And this API key is actually the public key, okay? Because we had a public key and a private key. So this is the public key. And the hash is an MD5 digest of the TS parameter, private key, and public key in this form. And we'll get to that later on. Basically, it's a way of encrypting these strings together and sending it over as a hash in the API. And this is a rather complicated authorization method. Some APIs will use headers instead of params. And you really just need to read the specific documentation for information about how to use the API. So that's all for this part of the video. I know we didn't touch any Wix or Wix code, but this is a really super important part of how to call an external API with Wix, understanding the API itself. And in the next video, I'll be showing you how to store and access your secret API key on your Wix website. So if you like this video, please do like and subscribe so that you see the notification about the next video that comes out in this series. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. See you next time.